It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our first keynote speaker. I was really adamant that I wanted Peter to speak at this conference, and when I talked to New Alchemy, I said, I want Peter. And real quick, I do want to clarify that no one has paid to speak. These are all people that genuinely want to be a part of the community. We haven't paid speakers. They see the mutual value here in being a part of this. And so that's one of the reasons we're very thankful to Peter. But also is Peter's a legend. For those of you that don't know Peter, Peter's been around from the beginning. So a lot of people say things, and myself included, is like, hey, we're all new to this space, and you know, in relative time speaking, we are. Peter's been there from the beginning. And so I'm just really excited for him to tell you about New Alchemy, for him to tell you about his experience starting in the Bitcoin Foundation. And he's the only person that I've said it was okay if he told us a little bit of history. So with that, please welcome Peter Vessenes.
Thank you so much. Actually, Seattle's sort of like ground zero for blockchain. Although I guess I think of our city as sort of like introverted and doesn't really want outsiders here, so nobody maybe knows. Within a few blocks of here, actually, the deal to start the Bitcoin Foundation was struck, which was a major force in the early days of crypto history. Roger Ver, Charlie Shrem flew in. Patrick Merck worked for me at the time, has since gone on to work at Harvard. And we have arguably the most secure and best kind of broad-scale retail exchange in the world here with Bittrex. Bill Shahara runs that. We have the most mining outside of China in Washington State. And so I think stuff like Token Forum is super important. Like for a long time, I've been like, gosh, someone should really start organizing Seattle together. In fact, when it became clear in early 2012 that Seattle was a place that blockchain tech was going to be happening at scale, people in Silicon Valley got so sort of kind of like proprietary about it and upset that they formed like a secret group. I was kicked off their mailing list years ago, but it's called the XGBTC mailing list, and it's like a fascinating experience to see what a town that thinks of its major industry as venture, going after new tech, does to kind of keep investments in the family, keep boosting companies in the family. And so I think events like this are just really important, and I'm glad you all are here, and I'm looking forward to meeting as many of you as might want to during the breakouts. Excuse me. Have some water, is there? Thank you. So this is something like my 8th crypto winter. They're not so fun. Almost equally bad is sitting at a crypto boom because you didn't stay long. So I actually thought it might be. I'm not going to give like a long history on crypto itself, but I actually want to talk about like New Alchemy over the last few years that started just ahead of a boom cycle, how it managed itself, and then how it's working through a bust cycle is just like a little bit of a case study for you all that are maybe getting into this now or have been at it a while, and you can tell us all the ways we screwed up and could have done it better. I became convinced there was something interesting about smart contracts in early 2016, so I was a little bit late to it. I passed on a venture investment in the Ethereum Foundation. I wanted to put $1 million in, and I wanted a better price than they wanted to give me, and I was grumpy over. It was a very small percentage, and foolishly I was like, forget it. It would have been something like 10% of all Ethereum now, so that's too bad. So I usually just have a list of like stuff I did you really should not do, is how I like to talk to people. Is like everybody else can tell you how smart they are. I'm more like about how dumb I've been over and over. That was one of many. and so I ignored it for a while. But then when I started looking at smart contracts, I just got, I thought, I actually found like a Ponzi scheme smart contract. An enduring love of mine, like well pitched Ponzi schemes, and I looked at it. Nobody had used it for a little while, and there were like thousands of ETH in it. And at the time, that was like $2,000 or something. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And so I like read the code, and I was like, I think if I send money in this way, I should get out like this big chunk, because it was like designed to keep people playing. And I sent money in, and nothing came out. I was like, damn it. And so then I start reading this code more carefully. And I'm like, God, there's bugs. There's bugs here. And then, and wait, and there's like comments that are outright wrong, maybe misleadingly so. There's variables that are named badly. I was like, well, this is very, very interesting. And so that sort of got me thinking, like, I'd taken a little bit of time off after I left the Bitcoin Foundation, and my family had adopted a child and to add to our bio kids. And so I was just sort of like on Bainbridge chilling. And I was like, this is too good. We got to get into this. And I ended up starting New Alchemy, which in its early days did smart contract security work, really. So I wrote up about some of the classes of bugs I found. I kind of went and looked at a bunch of interesting and famous smart contracts for the time. There were a lot of problems. I wrote about them. Some people took issue with my writing. Some of those who took issue were later hacked for like millions and millions of ETH, and that kind of kicked off New Alchemy. New Alchemy's brand as somewhere that you might go to, like, that you might trust to tell you what's really happening. And we quickly moved from there into what came to be termed Ico Advisory. So there's this period where early stage entrepreneurs are like, okay, boom's coming. Ethereum's at $10, $12. There's sort of like this licking of the wounds that happened after the DAO hack. So the DAO hack happens, which was just like the coolest thing in the world, like cyber ninjas fighting each other over digital currency. It's like, whoa, we're like in the future. I love this. And post DAO hack, it's like a month or two later, and everybody's like, great, let's try that again. let's see if we can go lock up another couple $100 million with creative coding and see what happens. And that sort of kicks off the ICO boom. And so anybody who'd been around early days that like was literally not dead was encouraged to start advising these companies. And New Alchemy got into that business. And at the time there was a little bit of concern about regulatory, not a ton. The history of Bitcoin regulation is that mostly, and this was partly a strategy, the Bitcoin Foundation, and partly just the way kind of the water flowed, was that we pushed to have Bitcoin regulated under money transmittal laws. So in the U.S., money transmission in particular is regulated at the federal level by FinCEN, at the state level by groups called in Washington, DFI, Departments of Financial Instruments, sometimes with the banking regulators. And there are some bad things about going that way. Like in particular, the US has a state-by-state, as many of you know if you're in the Bitcoin world, state-by-state regulatory on money transmission. So companies like CoinMe, I would guess, is anyone from CoinMe here? You guys money transmitters? Yeah, and is it just the worst fucking thing in the world dealing with? I'm sorry. It's one of the only regulatory regimes in the country that pierces the corporate veil to the compliance officer. The company will send them to prison if something bad happens. The Bank Secrecy Act compliance. So when we spent a lot of time at the foundation working with FinCEN, kind of like hammering out what ended up being how states and federal governments have gone at Bitcoin regulation for some time, which is that they decided they would regulate at the edges, like anywhere that hard US dollars in the US are going in and out of crypto. Those are places in the US where they want to know all the anti-money laundering, they want to know who's who, they want to track as much as they can. Most countries in the world have followed suit on that. There are a few places, like Switzerland is pretty lax. They have you can go to a Bitcoin Suisse ATM in Switzerland and get 2,000 francs with no ID up to 25 times a day. After that, the Swiss government wants to know who you are. Most places are more with the US where they want to regulate even a small transaction down at the edges. So So there's a sense in the early days of the token world that, hey, like a lot of this isn't really money transmittal anymore. Like these are like new, again, de novo asset classes, really interesting things. Early tokens were very, very interesting. I would say, when I say ICO industry, I think of startups tokenizing mostly. So I think tokenization is much broader than that, is how I would view the market. In that ICO world, though, you had a lot of companies, early days, savvy to the idea that like if they were just gonna put their cap table on the blockchain, maybe that didn't do much for anybody, and also maybe then they were running into securities laws. And so there was like this kind of explosion of creativity. My favorite one was, which I talk about every conference, so I'm gonna bore my folks, but hopefully not you guys. Numerai, which I don't know if you guys know what Numerai is, but it's like a Silicon Valley buzzword company. They get machine learning specialists to make trading algorithms for their hedge fund that work in a runoff competition. So their bots trade on preliminary data, and then the winning ones trade on the real data, and then they pay them in Bitcoin. Isn't that like? Don't you feel like you could get a $20 million Series A with just that sentence? So it turns out that works. It worked pretty well, but they had a few problems, and I won't get into too much of it here, but because we're just talking history. But in the end, they decided they could make a token that would get better behavior out of the traders that they were working with, and they issued it and floated this thing. And that to me was like a really fascinating moment. You have a company that's like, I don't know how much Numerai had under management then, but let's say $100 million. And they carved out this part of their business process. In particular, they wanted, since you guys are blockchain folks, they wanted traders to stake some of this token on how good they thought their bot was going to be in the real world. Like, okay, put your bot in, but make a bet with us, make a side bet with us, and we'll take people who make bigger side bets, who are really confident, who aren't like, yeah, this bot might work, it might not. So they took a part of their business process, tokenized it, made a liquid market for it. The times the markets are very free, it floated on Bittrex almost immediately. And actually, it's like the bull market, how I miss it. The Numerai token went up and traded over $2 billion in value very quickly, which is like clearly wrong for a $100 million fund that the like entrance fee tokens themselves in a big pile are worth $2 billion. Like that's too much. But it's also, to this day, it still trades and is worth, I think, tens of hundreds of millions of dollars, NMR, in aggregate. And so that's like a very fascinating and interesting moment. And in which like a company is sort of like a very, very much smarter than me or anyone you talk to in general, these dudes in San Francisco making this fund happen are like, with a little bit of regulatory freedom and also pushed by concerns to stay out of regulatory worries, like what could we do? What could we do with this new technology? And it turns out they did something really interesting. So in that era, New Alchemy like really wanted, of course, you might guess, having heard me talk so far, like is interested in companies like that, and we wanted to work with them, and we ended up building out a smart contract practice. So like Numerai was the first of these. We've had a few clients in our life who are like, we're going to publish a smart contract and then we are never going to touch it again. And even if there's a national security letter, we want to be able to say, sorry guys, we can't do anything about that. We built that. We built, in that era, we built all of Bittrex's smart contract wallet contracts. Everything, all your tokens going in through Bittrex go through New Alchemy software. We started a project called Metronome, which was like a much more ambitious, like full cryptocurrency with no human control at the end of it. And we started selling these larger advisory packages where we're helping people understand the crypto markets and the marketing and getting their security audits, and went to kind of a full service model. And what happened, so we had some good times, we had some bad times, it's like business. And what happened for us in early 2018 is at kind of the height of the boom, the regulators stepped in and finally had their way. And I found the process of watching that happen and then watching how our company responded to that very interesting. And one thing I would say about a difference between most crypto companies today and most crypto companies in 2012 is that, I guess the nice way to say it is like, you guys today are mostly grown-ups. Like, it's like the quality of, we can keep saying it nicely. Quality of professionalism is much higher. People have careers, they have relationships. They bring they bring real work experience. In 2012, it's, people like Charlie Shrem, who's like from the Bronx, 21 years old, is a Bank Secrecy Act compliant. He's the CEO and chief compliance officer for his company, is helping Silk Road trades happen on the side and teaching them to evade his system. That's like and duly went to prison for it. Like, you had a very kind of cowboy element. Like the early Bitcoin meetups are like at Pork Fest in New Hampshire. Has anybody been to Pork Fest besides me? I spent 6 Bitcoins on a hamburger at Pork Fest in 2011. It was an okay hamburger. These guys are like serious ideologues, serious libertarians. Whether smart, whether like highbrow like the Koch brothers, how do you even know how you say their name, or lowbrow, just like dudes in trucks buying stuff from Costco. Today we have like people with degrees, with professional experience, with running these businesses, and one of the big differences there. So now I'll say like why that's not always great. There's this fundamental belief in the early days of crypto that like the technology changed everything, changed laws, changed rules. Old laws don't apply. And in fact, like at the time, there would be like articles like, "Is Silk Road legal because Bitcoin?" And Silk Road is this sort of obviously infamous drug market. And this is like something like the press was writing about because Bitcoiners kind of felt like that was probably true. And they had this sort of like very swashbuckling attitude. And I think that was generally the right attitude. I think that, I got into crypto as a math major, thought it was just very interesting technology, had no real political, I don't know, I voted for Bush the first time, sorry. I volunteered for Obama the second time, so that's sort of my history, like politically. But my perspective, like why I think the Bitcoiners are right, is because I've actually seen regulators deal with technology that they can't control. Another anecdote I often tell is I got to be the first person to present Bitcoin to the U.S. Treasury Department. And FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement, and OFAC. And who knows what OFAC is? Anybody? Okay, yeah. Over here, the money transmitters are on this side. So OFAC is a list where they're like, you are not allowed to get a bank account anywhere in the world. It's like, it is like, they literally can ban you from financial life globally. It's a US run list. And actually it's open. You can download the OFAC list and see who you shouldn't be dealing with. So presenting to those groups is like very scary, as you might imagine. And this is in, I think, 2012. But the head of FinCEN at the time, Jen Shasky-Calvary, sat us down in a room ahead of our presentation and said, look, we think the toothpaste is out of the tube. So she's like, we're just talking about where do we go from here? And that's a powerful moment. And this is a woman who's like gets direct enforcement responsibility from like the world's currency to decide like who goes to prison, who can't get bank accounts. And she's basically like, this tech blows up our system. And to her credit, she rolled with that and I think did a good job balancing out industry and innovation needs and also regulatory needs. But I think that most companies in the tokenization space don't have that same mojo today. I think that there's a sense that like the SEC is scary, nobody wants to go to prison, and of course nobody does want to go to prison. And so we're talking about ways I've been dumb, history of Peter being dumb in crypto over the years. So one thing that I found interesting in early 2018, you basically have like, Chinese government through the fall and into the spring did a series of enforcement actions. And the way China does it is like, they they kind of rattle the saber, and then like they see if the market's cool, and then if they don't, they like rattle it a little louder, and then it was like house arrest. So that was happening in the fall, and there's like many a Silicon Valley millionaire who fled from China and can't go back, but they've been running like ICO investment rings in 2017. They like got out of Beijing just in time, kind of deal. The U.S. went at it their way, which is they started cherry picking and doing a couple. They did one lawsuit, kind of a clear fraud lawsuit, and then they actually, I think what I would think of as sort of like hit pay dirt and found a company. What were they called? The cookie thing. What was it called? Munchie, yeah. So Munchie, which they didn't have to sue, they just like wrote them a threatening letter, and then Munchie rolled, and the SEC sort of like published that they rolled, and published their like complaints to them, and that like created this flurry of rework in the U.S. and at New Alchemy, where we're in the middle of like assessing like, can we market and sell your thing with you? Can we partner with you? Can we invest with you? How much advice do you want? And then, all predicated on the idea that, many of these things are not securities. They have real utility. We talk about utility tokens. Things inside the company kind of ground to a standstill while people were like, what can we do? What can we do? Which is, the goal of regulators in that moment is to create precisely that kind of slow down, calm down, let them catch up, let them figure out what they want. And I was personally very surprised. I think just because I came from this different era, I was surprised at how much emotional impact that had on our customers and on people at New Alchemy, our employees at New Alchemy. So we had this thing happen where we had like a crazy founder, and then a lot of people who are not so crazy, who are like more kind of grown-ups. And when you start pulling lawyers into the room, I'm sure almost anyone in this space is thinking hard about their legal strategy and their legal bills. The lawyers are sort of like, don't do anything. You're like, well, but how will I make money to pay you if I don't do anything? So you're kind of getting all this, sort of stuff. What New Alchemy did, and a lot of top tier firms ended up doing this, and law firms did this too to provide these services. We went and recruited someone. So we have our general counsel came from the CFTC. So he was responsible, but he doesn't like banks. I like that. He was responsible for all the LIBOR litigation globally. So I was like, yes, you're my kind of guy. So people brought in this like outside knowledge and so on. And I think generally the perspective in the U.S. is that from the SEC point of view, like if it trades, it's a security. That's their story, full stop. And I think, so New Alchemy has had to adjust its business model. And I'll tell you kind of how we went at thinking about that and doing that in a second. Just because like our old model was predicated on like helping somebody take something that might have been a security and getting it into kind of utility space for our customers, or helping them understand like you probably can't sell this in the US and without filing your Reg D, filing your Reg A+, maybe signing up with a broker dealer, depending on how much you want to market it, all of that. I think like just to talk personally for a moment, like I would like to encourage you guys to think a little bit more back to decentralization and to technology that cuts across national bounds, legal bounds, regulatory, what regulators want to make them happy. I know for a fact it worked with the foundation. We paid about half the Bitcoin core team to develop, and we were still able to say to regulators like, I understand you want something different, but we're just here to explain to you what this is. And there's a chance to be making that kind of technology today on the token layer. Tokens where you're like, yes, I get that you would like it if every ICO had baked in national security, tech, and anti-money laundering cut in. But the reality is this stuff is going to get written, published, and used globally without that. And that's just your new reality. And you can be upset about that, you can like that, you can roll with the future. But I personally would like to encourage you guys to be thinking more along those lines. And that's why this phrase decentralization matters so much. It's not just like a religious code word or like an entry kind of like are you in the club because you like decentralization enough? It really is because it's because it sort of changes the nature of the conversation. And for those of you who are like working on getting tokens out to a large community, I would encourage you, and the communities will appreciate this, to figure out how to bring the community in. The community's guiding and directing these things. The thought of like, if you think about enforcing Bitcoin, the reason it was laughable to enforce it is like, there's like 1 million full nodes all over the world. Like what will you do? Like how will you even show there's nexus for any given Bitcoin transaction? Like there's just old legal concepts don't apply. And we have all that work from that era, and we have all the lessons learned from that era that we could go tap to be building out systems that are like harder to build, a little less certain exactly how they're gonna work, can't control them as well, but also that might be able to thrive long term. And so I think one thing in Seattle I would love to encourage you guys is to be thinking about stuff like that. What we ended up doing at New Alchemy, just to tell you like how we shifted, we went from these sort of like omnibus partner agreements where we're like helping our clients. There's probably had 50 or 60 clients through in the last 2 years, do everything to like very targeted services. So now we just do like a few things that, so we do a few things, and I'll tell you about how we've gone at selling tokens in the US market in a second. So New Alchemy now does like, we do kind of like the extended version of, we call it like a boost or launch product. 2 days, shakedown of your plans, your strategy, what you're hoping blockchain tech will do for you, what it can do for you now, what you're gonna have to build, how your token mechanics should work, kind of getting you ready to go fundraise, getting you ready to talk to the markets. That's one thing we do. We do like a more formal math token mechanics process. And then we sell software. So we have like a client software that'll let you launch auctions for your ICO, bakes in like decentralized exchange technology and smart contracts, and then we still have our security line of business. So we have a larger professional services group, and we also have a broker dealer. We have some partnerships now, and we're spinning up our own to let people kind of come at and sell more directly to the market. But at least in the U.S., we've just come at it and said like, here in the States, anything related to selling these tokens is going to fall under securities law, and so our customers are going to have to work through, if they want to work with us in that way, they got to work through these regulated entities in the States. Abroad, the story is still a little more Wild West, depends on the region. Some are just kind of full steam ahead at hawking these tokens without real regulatory oversight. Some places are, very conservative, like Europe is conservative in its own way. So that's sort of how New Alchemy kind of rolled with a boom market, and then is now rolling with a bust market. We're just focusing in on things we know will help our clients make them money, aren't reliant on the market turning for the business to work and so on. But we're also pushing hard, and I'm pushing hard inside our company and out for this, just kind of this like holding on to this decentralization idea, something that actually really does change how business works rather than just being like a kind of a code word. I'm trying to think of other stupid things I've done I might share with you. I did sell most of my Bitcoins at 6 cents. Yeah, that was dumb.
Well, thank you so much.